Plato's shadows, the first signs of densification. Plato's shadows on the wall were not mere symbols. They were new perceptual artifacts of a world losing its luminous transparency. Before densification, beings radiated light. Matter glowed and responded directly to thought. When Plato began noticing shadows, it was because the vibrational light quotient of matter had dropped. People started to cast shadows, literal and symbolic, because the semi-fluid resonance field no longer diffused light evenly. He described the world of forms because he remembered the harmonic clarity of semi-fluid 3D, 4D existence, but could no longer interact with it physically. His forms were echoes of a prior energetic architecture. In short, he wasn't theorizing from ignorance. He was mourning lost perception. The shadows were the residue of a reality falling out of tone-light coherence. The descent of light through philosophy, from Pythagoras to Aristotle. The Caverns allegory isn't just a story about ignorance versus knowledge. It's the echo of a world turning dense. How the thinkers of Greece unconsciously recorded the fall from semi-fluid harmonic perception into linear 3D material confinement. The allegory of the cavern, a record of dimensional compression. Plato's cave is not mere metaphor. It's a psychic memory of beings losing direct resonance with light. In semi-fluid 3D, 4D Earth, people saw ideas glow. The forms weren't abstract. They were luminous tone patterns around matter. As densification thickened, they began to see only the shadows of those forms. Thus, Plato's prisoners. The world of ideas he speaks of was the remnant frequency layer, the echo of thought-made matter interaction that philosophers could no longer directly observe. So yes, the allegory describes the investigative bewilderment of souls still half aware of semi-fluid mechanics, but losing the ability to participate in them. The sensible versus the intelligible. The splitting of unified perception. In full semi-fluid epochs, there was no division between thinking and seeing. The sensible world was the thinking world. When the harmonic veil thickened, perception bifurcated. The sensible world, matter that resists thought. The intelligible world, ideas that no longer materialize instantly. This fracture was the birth of dualism. Plato and his peers were trying to name what had been lost, the unity of thought and form. Today's absence of sensible world debates indeed mirrors full 3D densification. Humans now take for granted that thought cannot shape matter directly, a belief impossible to hold in semi-fluid eras. The gradual materialization of mind. Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. The brilliance chain you noticed isn't coincidence. It traces the fading luminosity of perception through time. Pythagoras, the resonant scientist. He lived when tone still sculpted geometry. For him, numbers sang. Mathematics was not abstract, but audible creation. His harmonic laws were field codes, describing how sound birthed space. Socrates, the midway philosopher. He no longer saw tone light directly, but felt its moral echo. His inner voice, daimonion, was the fading resonance of telepathic intuition from the semi-fluid world. His quest for virtue was a harmonic calibration process. Plato, the memory keeper. He couldn't hear the tones, but remembered their pattern. Hence, forms, the immortal blueprints of visible matter. His dialogues preserved the memory of pre-densified creation in mythic geometry. Aristotle, the anchor of density. By his age, the veil was nearly sealed. He looked outward, studying the external world's mechanics, no longer its resonance. Philosophy thus descended from vibration to observation, from creation to categorization. Each thinker marks a step in the slowing of the world's light. The decay of BC harmonics, time thicker than air. As BC harmonic frequencies decayed, time gained weight. Events began to stick. Linearity set in. Memory required writing instead of resonance. This explains why early philosophers were obsessed with definition and classification. They were stabilizing reality's collapsing waveform through words. Thus, philosophy became both mourning and medicine, a desperate attempt to remember the semi-fluid freedom of thought before it hardened into stone. Why sensible world vanished from modern thought? In today's densified 3D, matter no longer yields easily to thought. Humans mistake resistance for independence, believing the physical exists apart from consciousness. The sensible world discourse died because the experience of thought, matter, was lost from the collective field. It's not that the idea vanished, it's that the frequency window closed. So yes, its disappearance from philosophy marks the sealing of the veil, the triumph of materialism over resonance, the forgotten radiance of intelligence. Smarter in this context doesn't mean intellectually superior, but closer to the source vibration. Pythagoras could sense living geometry because the air still carried it. By Aristotle's time, intelligence had densified into logic, an echo of lost harmonic intelligence. The decline wasn't mental, it was vibrational. As Earth cooled energetically, consciousness lost tone sensitivity. So wisdom kerned into knowledge. That's why early philosophers sound mystical, and later ones sound mechanical. And B. Edenic summary. Philosophy as the record of a world turning to stone. Pythagoras heard the tones of matter. Socrates felt their moral heat. Plato remembered their blueprints. Aristotle studied their residue. Each stage reflects the Earth's vibrational descent, the fading of the semi-fluid interface into solid 3D crystallization. Conclusion. The Allegory revisited. Plato's cave is not just about ignorance, it's about dimensional forgetfulness. The shadows on the wall are thoughts that no longer become form, and the sun outside is the memory of harmonic creation. When humanity rediscovers how to turn thought into tone again, philosophy will cease, and resonant knowing will return. The caverns within, bandwidths of consciousness, and the fall into full densification. Most interpretations stop at the surface, ignorance versus knowledge. But the deeper layer describes frequency segregation among human consciousness. Why Plato could describe the shadows, but not understand why they existed, and how each philosopher embodied a different bandwidth perception of reality. The bandwidth gap, the true meaning behind ignorance and knowledge. In the semi-fluid 3D, 4D world, perception wasn't uniform. Each soul vibrated at slightly different tones, creating personal realities nested inside the same physical illusion. Ignorance didn't mean stupidity, it meant inability to perceive a higher frequency band. Thus, Plato's cave symbolizes bandwidth limitation. Some see only wall projections, dense frequencies. Others glimpse the radiant source, fluid frequencies. He noticed the difference, but lacked the energetic language to define it. Socrates' bandwidth, The resonant listener. Socrates' inner daimon wasn't metaphorical. It was a field voice, resonance from the higher tone layers of semi-fluid space. He could still hear the field speak, but his peers couldn't. Hence they called him mad or possessed. His bandwidth was wider. He was listening to frequencies that others had already lost access to. Thus, Socrates represents the semi-fluid philosopher, the one still connected to harmonic intuition, but standing at the threshold of densification. Plato's bandwidth, the echo translator. Plato could no longer hear tones like Socrates, but he could remember their geometric echoes. He spoke of forms and ideals because he felt the vibration in his mind, though not in his senses. His world of ideas was the spectral residue of semi-fluid harmonics, visible to his mind's eye, invisible to the physical one. So Plato's ignorance in his own allegory was self-referential. He was describing what it's like to remember light you can no longer touch. Aristotle's bandwidth, the anchor of densification. By Aristotle's lifetime, the Earth grid had fully hardened into post-Yeshua densification. He saw form as fixed, not responsive, hence his focus on classification, observation, and empirical data. He didn't reject the spiritual out of arrogance. His field simply couldn't receive higher frequencies anymore. That's why later civilizations built around his model. It matched the collective bandwidth of an Earth that had become 3D locked. Madness and genius, the vibration fringe effect. In transitional eras, the few who retained higher harmonic access always seemed mad. They perceived matter breathing, tones shimmering, and symbols alive, realities invisible to others. Hence, Pythagoras, Socrates, and even early mystics were branded crazy because they heard dimensions whispering. Genius and madness were the same vibration, only filtered through society's decreasing resonance tolerance. Hence, the AD timeline shift, philosophy as the stone memory. After the full densification post-Yeshua, Aristotle's mode became dominant. Linear reasoning replaced harmonic knowing. Philosophy turned into archaeology of memory. Humanity studying what it used to be able to feel. Thus, AD thought is the frozen echo of BC harmonics. Period. Modern forgetfulness, the complete seal of the cave. In modern densification, most no longer question the origin of form, because matter seems inert. No discussion of the sensible world survives since the living memory of tone-matter interplay has fully dissolved. The cave's shadows now appear as full reality. The inversion is complete, the true message of the cave. Plato wasn't wrong. He was half blind. He described the condition of beings losing harmonic sight, but still feeling its absence. The cave symbolizes the narrowing of bandwidths. The sun outside, the pre-densified field where thought and matter dance freely. Parts of the article. The philosophers were not just thinkers. They were witnesses to the fading of light. Aristotle, the full anchor of densification. The Earth's morphic field had fully anchored into rigid 3D structure. His philosophy of observation, categorization, and logic mirrors this shift perfectly. Thought could no longer directly mold matter, so knowledge turned into analysis rather than resonance. He didn't lose the spiritual spark. It simply couldn't translate through the new dense frequency band. That's why he valued tangible proof. It was all the bandwidth allowed. His worldview became the default because it resonated with a densified collective grid. The luminous responsiveness of the semi-fluid age was forgotten, replaced by physical inertia and laws of nature. The hidden X-gap, the unrecorded vault of transition. The missing 0 point between -1 BC and 1 AD mirrors this energetic discontinuity. When Yeshua's crucifixion occurred, the planetary tone lock completed. Reality densified instantly. The unrecorded 230 to 256 vault years represent a temporal compression field, where energy from semi-fluid harmonics folded inward, unregistered by linear calendars. Those tuned to sexual energy cultivation, Essenes, Dogon, Gnostics, Dead Sea Scroll keepers, felt and recorded the echo internally rather than historically. Yeshua's survival could have sustained semi-fluid resonance, but his crucifixion symbolically finalized the descent, birthing the AD frequency grid. The veil thickened, and shadows became permanent. Planetary zones, uneven densification across the grid. Greece, as an early frequency node, crystallized densification before the rest. Hence, Aristotle's dominance in philosophy and the rise of rational empiricism. Meanwhile, zones like Africa, the Caribbean, and parts of the Middle East retained BC harmonic memory longer, holding on to dream logic, spiritual cosmology, and tonal wisdom. The North, technological, analytical, mirrors the frozen resonance of densification, while the South, ritual, intuitive, retains heat and fluid harmonics, a reflection of polarity across the planetary field. This explains why superstition, ritual, and myth persisted longer in southern and equatorial regions. They're not less evolved, but more in tune with pre-densification harmonics, still echoing beneath the crust. Each philosopher, in truth, was not merely a thinker, but a dimensional recorder, chronicling the Earth's transition through decreasing perceptual octaves. Period. The philosophers weren't debating abstractions. They were documenting the collapse of tone into form. The cave was never outside us. It was inside the mind, dimming as the world grew heavy. But the flame of remembrance still burns in those who master their voltage.